Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. It's wild, but the human brain actually forgets about 70% of new information within just 24 hours if we only read it passively. So today, we're taking a really fascinating look at how to break out of that trap of simple memorization and actually structure our minds. If you've ever pulled an all-nighter, stared at your notes for hours, but still went totally blank the second the test hit, well, this is exactly the breakdown you need. Here's our agenda for today. 1. The illusion of competence. 2. Deconstructing the pyramid. 3. Higher-order thinking skills. 4. The HOTS framework. 5. The split-page journal. And finally, 6. The ultimate competitive advantage. Section 1. The illusion of competence. Let's start with the first major problem we're all facing in this era of rapid, shallow scrolling. We've all been there, right? Sitting at a desk late at night, dragging a neon yellow highlighter across a super dense page, making literally every single line glow. You flip through flashcards, maybe rewrite a few sentences word for word, then you close the book and you feel this incredible sense of accomplishment. You honestly feel like you've mastered the material just because you've painted the page yellow. But actually, this perfectly illustrates a really dangerous trap. On one side, we've got familiarity. That's your passive review, your linear data consumption. You recognize the words, so your brain tricks you and says, oh yeah, I know this. But true understanding, that requires active synthesis and open-ended problem solving. The illusion of competence happens when your brain completely confuses mere familiarity with the deep understanding you actually need to solve real-world problems. The second you face a tough analytical question, all that recognition vanishes and your mind just completely freezes up. Section 2. Deconstructing the pyramid. To fix this illusion, we need to map out the structural dependencies of human learning, and we'll use the revised Bloom's taxonomy for that. Let's look at the absolute foundation of this cognitive pyramid. Step 1 is remember, just reciting raw facts. Step 2 is understand, explaining basic concepts. These two, they represent the shallow zone of learning. And the massive problem today is that traditional study habits keep us completely trapped right here in the basement. We're just consuming data in a straight line, and our cognitive stamina quietly drains away. Section 3. Higher-order thinking skills. Now, let's move up the pyramid and see where true intellectual mastery actually lives, up in the top 4 layers. Step 1 up here is apply, where we use patterns. Step 2 is analyze, where we start mapping out structural dependencies. Step 3 is evaluate, where we're actively testing different perspectives. And step 4 is create, building entirely new frameworks. Ascending through these top 4 steps does something absolutely incredible to your brain. You completely re-engineer your mental baseline, making yourself basically immune to shallow distractions. You stop just recognizing things and you start actually wielding them. Which brings us to HOTS, or higher-order thinking skills. This is the upper tier of cognitive learning, where the brain applies, analyzes, evaluates, and creates. It's moving way, way beyond basic recall. The big takeaway here is that operating exclusively in this hot zone is the absolute key to deep cognitive endurance. Section 4. The HOTS framework. All right, it's time to take this theory and make it highly practical. The HOTS framework requires 3 deliberate operational shifts every single time you interact with new information. Step 1 is the analysis phase, shifting from what to why. Step 2 is the interrogation layer, the evaluation phase. And step 3 is the blueprint phase, the creation phase. Let's visualize exactly what each of these shifts looks like. And since we're big on visuals here, try to vividly picture these steps in your mind. For the analysis phase, picture a fine-tip black ink pen, physically tracing out a cause and effect flow diagram on crisp red paper. It's drawing connections between abstract variables. When you study a complex topic, never just list out its characteristics. Force yourself to draw out its hidden structural dependencies. Literally map it out, sketch it, turn those concepts into a clear picture. And while you are drawing out those visual connections, you have to ask yourself one absolutely critical question. If I remove this one variable, what happens to the entire system? Asking this specific question transforms isolated, boring data points into a deeply interconnected network. It forces your brain to understand the hidden mechanics behind what you're actually learning. Next up is the interrogation layer. Imagine a fountain pen filled with rich burgundy ink scribbling a harsh critique right in the margin of a document. Alternative perspective, source bias. During this layer, you basically have to become a critic. Treat every text not as absolute gospel, but as a thesis that needs to be cross-examined. Actively argue against the author, hunt for potential biases.
You're no longer just a passive container for information, right? You are its interrogator.
Finally, we reach the blueprint phase. Imagine blocks of raw textbook summaries being rapidly synthesized and rebuilt into a highly visual custom workflow chart on a beautiful blank digital canvas. This is the very apex of the taxonomy. You take the info you've analyzed and critiqued, and you re-engineer it into a completely new visual format to force absolute clarity. Building a visual picture out of raw text locks that information into your long-term memory almost instantly.
Section 5, the split-page journal.
To apply this entire framework instantly, we are going to use a highly deliberate physical system. Think of it visually. Visualize a physical journal divided right down the middle. On the left column, you use clean black ink. On the right column, you use that intense burgundy ink. The left side is strictly for macro facts, definitions, and core rules. Keep it totally minimal. But the right side, that is your analytical workspace. You are literally visually separating clean, basic facts on the left from intense, high-order critical thinking on the right.
So what exactly goes into that burgundy right column? Well, instead of basic recall questions, you write things like, how does this principle contrast with the model we studied last week? Or, in what real-world scenario would this framework completely fail? When you review your notes, physically cover that left side of the page and force your brain to answer those specific high-order questions. Doing this triggers intense active retrieval and reveals the actual true limits of your understanding.
Section 6, the ultimate competitive advantage. Let's bring all of this together. The goal here is simple. You stop being a collector of words and become an architect of ideas. By adopting this visual, highly active system, you can actually cut your study hours in half. Why? Because every single minute you spend operating up in that hot zone delivers 10 times the cognitive value of shallow repetition. True cognitive sovereignty belongs to those who flat out refuse to just stay on the surface. So, the choice is ultimately yours. Will you remain trapped in that illusion of competence, or will you start interrogating information to physically build your own cognitive architecture? In a world just filled with shallow digital noise, the ability to analyze, evaluate, and creatively map things out is your ultimate competitive advantage. Stop memorizing, start interrogating. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.